Secretary of State, was talking about how it's a problem to make so much of what we rely on overseas. It's a national security issue. We've heard that in the past. He says it's a problem that all we really export in a big way is services. They're calling this a national emergency. Is it?
That's fascinating because it's very revealing because it reveals that they don't actually consider services to be a real thing. So even though services now are the biggest part of the economy, President Trump is obsessed with factories, with metal bashing, with cars, with things in the economy that dominated 50 years ago. It's very, very retro in almost every way. And what's fascinating right now, when you look at what's happening, is that, yes, he says he has a plan, and I think he probably does have a rough direction where he wants to go. But unlike the first administration, where he was surrounded by people who had been in government before and knew more about how government worked than he did, and were basically able to stymie him in his eyes, this time round, he's surrounded by people who, for the most part, have been in government less time than he has been. And he spent several years thinking about how he can actually execute his ideas. So what we're seeing in the president, who's very determined to stick to this course, and the consequence of that, and the reason why the markets are panicking, is down to the S word, not the four-letter word that some portfolio managers might feel right now looking at numbers, but stagflation above all else, because that appears to be where we're heading, and the markets hate that. And I suspect many American voters are going to hate it too.
So there's the quasi-national security argument that we heard this morning from Marco Rubio. There was also something of a moral argument that we heard from Howard Lutnick. Let me play that. This is him speaking to CNN.
So what you're going to see is factories going to be built here. Why should U.S. policy basically suggest that you can find the cheapest labor in the world with the worst labor conditions in the whole wide world, the worst pollution, right? No environmental rules at all. Let's go build there because it's really cheap and we'll sell it to the great American economy. How about we build it here? We use robotics here that's cheaper than cheap labor overseas. You're going to see something completely different.
Is this them, Gillian, saying that we need to kneecap China? We need to kneecap Asia. We need to bring a lot of this back here. Is that a coherent strategy? And if that were the goal, is this the way to do it?
Here's the issue. COVID showed everybody that there is dangerous supply chain vulnerability in many parts of the American economy. And I think almost everyone would agree that something needs to be done to try and address that in targeted sectors. And most people would agree that there are places for tariffs to actually be effective if you introduce them in a targeted, thoughtful, careful way. What has really shocked the markets is that these tariffs are not targeted. He's hitting absolutely everybody from Madagascar, which sells vanilla to America. America's not going to have a vanilla industry. It's a really poor country, so why slap a tariff of 50% on Madagascar? He's tariffing islands with no people, just penguins. So it's the indiscriminate nature of these tariffs. And this seemingly crazy formula he actually used to decide what level of tariffs to actually put on other countries, which almost no mainstream economists recognize at all.
Is this going to be a before and after moment, Christine? Are we going to think of this as this was the world order before, and then after Wednesday, there's going to be a different version of things?
I mean, if these tariffs stay on and if the president keeps them on, maybe. That's very, very possible. But, I talked to a senior economist at a major bank earlier today who told me we called this tragic. What's happening right now, tragic, and said the United States just lost its moral authority in the rest of the world, and that you're going to see alliances change in an anti-U.S.-led way because the United States wrongly thinks that these trade deficits are a sign of weakness. These trade deficits are a sign of the United States is super rich, and its consumer can have whatever it wants. And so it buys them from around the world, from places where we don't make them, like, for example, the vanilla. Some of these countries make something better, comparative advantage. They make something better than we do. We do a great job in soybeans and aircraft and services, all these services like financial services, banking services, insurance services. We have run surpluses around the world in those things, and now they're all targets for retaliation.
Some of the talking points in the White House, Doug, are to redirect people to a time when things were better for America, when main streets were thriving in small towns, where industries weren't hollowed out, where you weren't seeing empty manufacturing plants. They want to make it so that we go back to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s even, before globalization really took hold. Is that what Trump's voters wanted? Is that what they said, please give us? We don't want to rely on China any longer. We don't want these cheap, mass-produced goods. We want to be able to shop in our local town.
Not really, no. None of that was part of the conversation. And, Katie, I moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina in the early 1980s. There were two industries in Winston-Salem at the time, basically, textiles and tobacco. Both of those don't really exist there anymore, and there are obvious reasons for that. But ultimately, we're not going to be able to do this necessarily with robotics. And if we are, that doesn't bring back the jobs. And that word, I think, is so critical here because it's part of what gets lost on this. I had a conversation today with my friend Daniel Jonas, who's a sommelier, wine importer that throws wine festivals and all this kind of amazing stuff in New York. And he walked me through when wine comes from France or Italy or Spain or wherever, the distribution channel that it goes through. That's an importer. That's an American importer. It's an American distributor, American retailer, restaurant, waiter, delivery. There's a whole lot of American jobs that are tied to that. And the other conversation I had with somebody this morning was at the American Footwear Distributors and Retailers Association, which is probably an association most Americans haven't heard of. But whether you're buying Nikes or you're buying Bruno Cucinelli's, that's going to have an impact on you. Whether you're buying $30 shoes or the really, really expensive stuff that I can't afford, those prices are going up. And that seems very clear. That's going to have an impact on jobs as well at your local mall or what you order from Zappos or wherever else it may be.
I asked a few Trump supporters today, longtime Trump supporters, how they felt, and they said that they were okay. They were taking a breath and they were giving Donald Trump time. How much time does he have?
Look, I think with his core base support, he has there's sort of like a price elasticity with Donald Trump. We don't know how far it goes, but it does extend a bit. What's interesting, though, is you're seeing a lot of congressional Republicans who don't typically speak out against Donald Trump doing so. Rand Paul this week. Ted Cruz, if you look at his Twitter account, his X account today, it's pretty clear he doesn't like tariffs as well. That is where the traditional Republican Party has been. Obviously, it's not the traditional Republican Party anymore.